this current economic climate, homelessness is a growing problem for people in the United Kingdom. With high levels of unemployment and repossession of houses across the country, many people are finding themselves without the basic provision of shelter. Since 2011, the number of rough sleepers in Britain has increased by a fifth, and cuts to housing benefits coming into effect in April 2013 will only worsen the situation. Birmingham is exemplary of the current crisis, and the city has the highest number of homeless people, a reported 925 households. Professor David Mullins is a leading expert in housing policy at the University of Birmingham and provides some insight into common misconceptions held about homelessness.
The dominant perception of people who are homeless is people sleeping in a cardboard box or in a sleeping bag on the street, and I think it's generally assumed that they are homeless because they have either because they have problems, which will be the caring kind of version of it, or they're homeless because they're not looking after themselves. So probably not a particularly sympathetic image, and an image that's associated with a tiny minority of the people who are actually homeless, in that something like 35,000 households each year are accepted as homeless in priority need, and most of those are families with children. That is not most people's perception of homeless people. So it's something that everyone can do. You talked about attitudes to homelessness. I think the role of public education and people understanding it could happen to you, because if it's about an increase in risk in society, people not having the level of security that they were used to, then it could actually happen to you. And I think when people recognise that, that will begin to change the images that people have of homelessness.
But what do people in Birmingham really think about homelessness? We talked to people in the city centre about why they think there are still people without a home in our welfare society.
I think people can't afford rent nowadays, or they can't afford their own property.
With a lot of them, they get onto drugs, they spend the money on drugs.
The population is too big in the country because so many people are coming in. There's no work for them when they come in.
Family breakdown, drink and drug misuse, out of prison.
It's a product of the system that we have at the moment, that you're going to have some people at the top and some people at the bottom.
It's due to family rift, social and financial environment.
I think that some people are just lazy and they have a lot of problems in their, their issues with their life.
They're not actually there by choice, and it's just difficult for them.
Something happened to anybody, you see what I mean?
Can't believe it that we actually got it going in this day and age. You know what I mean? We can put people on the moon, but we can't put people in houses.
Dave is currently homeless, and has been so on and off for the past 10 years. He shares with us about what it's like to be homeless, living day to day on the streets of Birmingham.
People that's actually homeless on the streets, in the UK are used, they say that the statistics are 83% being alcoholics or drug addicts, but a lot of people that actually see people on the streets think they are alcoholic or drug addicts. And yes, I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'm also saying that there's actually people like that's been through domestic violence or been through emotional problems, mental health issues, or even marriage breakups. So not everybody should be bracketed in the same, given that same label. You said they're an alcoholic when they're not. It's just because of a relationship breakdown, and they've got nowhere to go. How you live day to day, being on the streets, is you just take one day at a time. You always look for places to see that they're open. Sometimes I spend a lot of time. Sometimes you just end up walking around. I end up walking in parks, and I go to the library. Especially in museums, especially now, that I'm off the drink trying to sort myself out. So a lot of it, is boredom a lot of the time, and you just walk just to keep yourself amused. The homeless service available in the UK is up and down at the minute, especially with the government, with the government change regarding benefits and regarding, the sort of the council and the local connection, whatever. At the minute it's not affected Birmingham, but it will be affected Birmingham, which means that, if you haven't got a local connection in the local area, you're going to be shipped back to where you're from. And a lot of the time that actually will cause more problems because a lot of people move from that area due to reasons of getting into trouble. So there's going to be major changes regarding that, and I think the homeless population is going to increase, not decrease.
This winter, Dave received support from the Birmingham Church's Winter Night Shelter, a non-governmental project that provided nightly accommodation for homeless men in the city during the coldest months.
This year, the Birmingham Christian Homeless Forum, working together with Thrive Together in Birmingham, decided to build on the success of the pilots of the church's winter night shelter that they set up and piloted last year for 2 weeks, and set up a church's winter night shelter using the housing justice model for a longer period of time, working with more churches. So this year we had 6 churches involved in the night shelter, each of them providing 1 night of accommodation, a hot meal and breakfast in the morning.
I think the shelter does more than give people a bed and a hot meal. I think it recognises each guy as an individual, as a human being with intrinsic worth and value. And that maybe is equally or more important than a bed and a hot meal.
I met a young man, and it was during the week, I think it was about 5 weeks ago, when it was just snowing, and he told me that he'd slept out at Moore Street Station overnight, and that he'd woken up in the morning outside Moore Street Station, and he was covered in this enormous layer of snow, and he woke up wet, like his sleeping bag was wet through, and he just pulled the sleeping bag over his head, and he looked at all the people walking past, and nobody was looking at him, and he just put the sleeping bag back over his head, and he told me that he just burst into tears because he just realised that nobody cared about him, or he felt that nobody cared about him.
I think it shows that, you know, there is still a basic human care, and a lot of people who want to show that. That not everyone wants to walk by on the other side of the road. There is a genuine concern and people want to try and help.
Very, very early on, I had an opportunity to, on the very first night, to meet up with one of the guests here who was, who clearly had been a rather vulnerable individual, health-wise and in other ways. He'd been homeless for 4 years and hadn't, during that 4 years, ever been placed on the list for housing. That seemed quite shocking to us. On the following day, on the Thursday, I went with him, as well as one of our volunteers here, to the neighbourhood centre. We managed to get him into emergency housing that day.
They decided to have the volunteering opportunities over the winter, and it just struck me that I'd never thought about people being actually homeless in the sleeping rough over the Christmas period when I'm warm and having a good time. So that was the reason I thought I need to give back.
Dave is another volunteer at the winter night shelter and used his own experiences of being homeless in the past to help others in the same situation. He shares with us his personal story of how he became homeless and how he thinks that homelessness is viewed by the public.
I actually went over there for bad purposes. I actually went to Amsterdam, and my intention was to go there, have a load of fun and then kill myself. And so I know that place of desperation and darkness where there doesn't seem to be any point to life. And I survived that, but then obviously found myself without any money, without any passports, and nowhere to go. From what I've experienced, I think people make assumptions, and the general assumption is they've made choices which have led them there. And nobody seems, the average person doesn't seem to be willing to look any deeper than that, and to think that life can hit anybody, bad things can hit anybody, and it's not necessarily somebody's fault that they're homeless.
With rates of homelessness steadily increasing, and with changes being made to housing provision, it is clear that the government can no longer be solely relied on to provide shelter for all in society. It is up to you and me to help those who are most in need, and in doing so challenge some of the misconceptions that exist about homeless people today. There are many ways that you can help in your local community, whether at a shelter, a food bank or a drop-in centre. We asked members of the public if they would take action to help homeless people.
I can, yeah. I'll try and help out as much as I can.
I would if there was hope for help.
Yes, I would. I have done in the past and I do.
Of course, yeah.
Like helping people, yeah, sure.
Yes, of course. This is human. I have a human thing.
But will you help the homeless?